Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our press conference. A week ago, Nigel and I were up in Derbyshire, where you might have noticed we took over a petrol station, and we drew attention to the fact that the cost of filling up for your petrol or diesel is just going up and up and up. It was pretty cold, but I think we got a warmer reaction than Rachel Reeves would have got, I can tell you that. There were queues of tractors and white vans and people all snaking around the lanes of the Derbyshire Dales. And we sent a very strong message, firstly to Rachel Reeves, that she needs to cancel her increase in fuel duty that's coming down the tracks in September, and to everyone in the country, that Reform is the only party that is truly committed to bringing down your bills, to lightening the load, and to making life just that little bit easier for people right now across the country. And that is what today is about as well, because everyone is finding life tough at the moment. When you go to the supermarket, the cost of groceries are going up and up and up. When you go to fill up at the petrol station, even before the war, it was expensive. And now it's going through the roof. And on top of all of that is the cost of energy. Now, I've met people in my constituency in Nottinghamshire who are so anxious about this at the moment. I've met pensioners who have been, frankly, shivering this winter because they couldn't afford to turn up the thermostat and to heat their home properly. I met a single mum the other day who came to see me who said that she had cried when she opened her energy bill because she didn't know how she was going to pay for it, put food on the table, buy school uniform for her kids, keep things going. And that is wrong. It's frankly outrageous that we live in a country where people are finding life so tough, and yet Rachel Reeves is continuing to load people's energy bills with taxes, and Ed Miliband is continuing to put green taxes and levies after taxes and levies on people's energy bills. Enough is enough. People are sick of this. Workers are sick of it. Families are sick of it. Pensioners are sick of it. And Reform is sick of it too, and we are going to fix it. That is why today we're announcing that we're going to get rid of those taxes and levies. We're going to bring down people's bills, and we're going to save the average household at least £200 off their energy bill. And that this will just be the beginning of our mission to make life easier, to cut the cost of living, and to ensure that in the future, in our country, there is cheap and reliable energy. Now, where did this all begin? Well, it goes back a lot longer than just the last couple of years. For decades, including under governments by my former party, our country has been badly managed. We've had the wrong energy policy. We've failed to build new nuclear power stations. We've failed to invest. In fact, we've downgraded some of our most important infrastructure. We have just 2 days of gas storage now as a country. Can you believe that? And we've pursued the most extreme version of net zero. We are just 0.8% of the world's emissions. 0.8%. And yet, despite all of the work that's happened over the last few decades, Ed Miliband, supported by Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer, are determined to go even further, impoverishing working people and deindustrialising our country, destroying what remains of our heavy industry, car manufacturing, steel, ceramics, glass, all gone or in danger of going in the years ahead unless we change course as a country. So we've got to make sure that we put as much pressure on this failing government as possible now, and show the British people, show everyone watching at home, that there is a better way, and that a reform government can fix this, can bring down your bills, can bring back good jobs to this country, and can set us on a better path for the future. And so a reform government is going to do two big things. Firstly, we're going to get rid of the heating tax. VAT on domestic energy bills will be gone in the first reform budget. Now, this is a tax that was created, for those of you with long memories, by the Conservatives in the aftermath of Black Wednesday. It was hated then. People felt it was deeply unfair, and it's deeply unfair today. VAT on the most basic need, heating your home. VAT on a pensioner just trying to keep warm on a cold winter's night. What happened? Well, Ken Clarke couldn't even get it through his budget. There was a vote in Parliament. He had to keep it at 8% instead of 17%, which is what he wanted. Then in came Labour. They'd said they were going to get rid of it. They brought it down to 5%, but they didn't. Gordon Brown said he wanted to cut it to zero, but he couldn't, because whilst we were in the EU, we were constrained. In opposition, what did Labour say? Well, Rachel Reeves held a debate in Parliament, called a vote in Parliament, saying that this was unfair and that she wanted it to be scrapped as something that could be done now. And this was back in 2022, to help people with the cost of living. But in government, did they do it? No, of course they didn't do it. They've allowed energy bills to continue to go up. So a reform government, we're going to get rid of it once and for all. And this will save the average household at least 85 quid off your energy bill. And secondly, we're going to get rid of the green taxes and levies that Ed Miliband has loaded onto your energy bills. Taxes and levies that mostly, they just go to the energy companies. Together, these are going to save £115 off the average energy bill. So together, £200 off your energy bill, delivered in the first reform budget after the next election. And contrast that to what Rachel Reeves and Ed Miliband and the Prime Minister announced just yesterday. They said that they would give a small amount of money to the chosen few to help them with their oil bills. Well, of course we welcome that. Of course we want to help those people who are finding life tough at the moment. But the Prime Minister said that there was what he calls price gouging, profiteering. Well, if anyone's profiteering right now, it's Rachel Reeves. You don't need to be an economist who worked for 10 years at the Bank of England to know that with fuel prices and energy prices going through the roof, the Treasury is raking it in. In fact, I read in the Telegraph yesterday that Rachel Reeves is going to make up to 3 billion quid extra in tax as a result of everything that's happening right now around the world. But instead of passing that on to hard-pressed people, she's making their life even more difficult. And that is the difference between this government that doesn't get it, doesn't understand how tough life is at the moment, and reform, which is and will always be on the side of working people. Now, how are we going to fund this? I did a speech a couple of weeks ago, and Nigel did one just across the river at the banking hall in the city in November, in which we both said that a reform government is never going to promise to cut people's taxes unless we are certain that we can afford it and can afford to do so sustainably. We're not going to do what Rachel Reeves did before the last general election, when she said that she would only increase taxes by 6 billion. And what's she done? She's increased them by 68 billion and rising. We're not going to do what Liz Truss did under the Tories and play fast and loose with the economy with disastrous effects. So before we announced this policy today, we put in the hard yards. Danny Kruger, James Orr, our team at Reform have been doing weeks, months of meticulous work, finding the savings, that we can do to ensure that we cut out the waste and people's money that's being sprayed around by this government at the moment, and we can afford to do this tax cut today. And we found amongst quangos £2.5 billion of tax cuts. That's ensuring that these organisations, which ministers created in order to give accountability for things that the public care about to others, and yet they're continued to be funded by taxpayers' money, that the gravy train comes to an end. And let me give you a couple of examples. Homes England, one of these arm's-length bodies, 111 people who work there earn more than 100 grand a year. Can you believe that? In fact, across all of these quangos, there are more than 1,700 people earning more than 100 grand. Ofgem, the regulator, many people probably don't even know what it does. It's certainly not doing a good job, is it, at the moment, given what's happening with energy. 5 years ago, it had 1,000 employees, a big organisation. 5 years later, 2,750 individuals work for it. These organisations are out of control. Under reform, we're going to trim them. We're going to end the gravy train because we have the backbone to do it, to take on those vested interests, to take on the people who have those cushy jobs that most people in our country could never even imagine. By doing that, and I should say this is just the beginning, because Danny's work will continue, we're going to save £2.5 billion and we're going to reduce people's taxes by that amount. Day one, first budget of a reform government. And that's the point. Only reform led by Nigel Farage has the backbone to take on those vested interests, to end the madness of net zero, which is impoverishing our country and deindustrialising our industry, losing good jobs. Only reform understands in our hearts, to our core, just how tough life is right now in the country, how people are suffering, and only reform is going to change it. And ladies and gentlemen, as a down payment on that, we're going to start today a competition. This is just a small down payment on what we want to do, but we're asking people to go online, go to the website that we're launching this morning, www.nigelcutmybills.com. You'll see our plan to bring down people's bills there, how we're going to scrap the heating tax, how we're going to ensure that we get rid of Ed Miliband's taxes and levies, how we're going to end the madness of net zero. And if you give us your details on that website, in the next week or two, we're going to draw one of those names, and Nigel is going to come to your house, and he's going to pay your energy bills and those of everyone who live on your street for an entire year. So if that sounds good, then go to our website, enter our draw, spread the word, pass it to your friends and your neighbours and your colleagues on Facebook, on Twitter. And know this, today reform can only cut the energy bills of one street in this country. But a reform government will cut the energy bills of every single street in every part of our country. Britain is broken. It feels it right now. And we feel it when we fill up at the gas station for petrol or diesel. We feel it when we see our energy bills. But it can be fixed. It will be fixed. Reform have a plan. We have a strong leader in Nigel Farage. We have a team around him, and we're going to do it. Reform are going to lower your bills and fix our country. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Now I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Richard Tice. Thank you very much, everyone.
Good morning, Robert. Thank you very much indeed. And it's fantastic to be here with everybody. I'll just take us back to the 1980s and 1990s. We were an energy exporter, and no one was talking about the price of our gas, our oil, and our electricity. Why? Because we had loads of it in the North Sea, and we were using it. And it was the right thing to do. Now, some 20, 30 years later, it's all anybody is talking about. The price of energy, the price of electricity, and whether or not, heaven forbid, we might even have rationing or blackouts. That's where it's got to, folks. The idea of not just extraordinary prices, but rationing and blackouts. And yet we're sitting on huge, huge reserves and quantities of our energy treasure. And just in the last 4 years alone, 2 external international events have provided energy shocks. Just imagine if we were using all of that energy treasure. And it was exactly 4 years ago that Nigel and I first started to campaign and rail against the madness of net stupid zero. And we were cancelled, yes. We tried to launch a campaign and have rallies under a slogan, power, not poverty. That slogan is still valid today, but we were cancelled. Venues were intimidated and harassed into cancelling our confirmed bookings to talk about the cost of energy, the shortage of energy, and the foolishness of what Westminster had done to us. Utterly, utterly mad. And last year, 2025, Norway, they opened some 49 new exploration and production platforms in the North Sea. 49. Last year, the United Kingdom, for the first time since the 1960s, we opened 0. Absolutely none. The complete foolish stupidity of this has led us to the point where we're now having to import our gas, even though we've got loads of it literally offshore and onshore. It is the definition of insanity. It lacks any common sense whatsoever. People are beginning to realise that actually we've been right on this all along. Even the new chief executive of Renewable UK, an organisation that lobbies and promotes wind and solar, in her new position she writes this morning that yes, the UK should drill, drill, drill. Not only just offshore, but she agrees with Nigel and I and Reform that actually we should be using our shale gas treasure as well. I believe it is our patriotic duty to use our own energy treasure, offshore and onshore, for ourselves, our children and our grandchildren. Not to do so, frankly, is financially negligent. It seems the only person who still thinks that it's a good idea to go down the route of not exploring any more oil or gas in the UK is Red Ed Miliband. He's sort of the last man standing. And I think people realise he's just got this badly, badly wrong. At some point, his time will come up. At the latest, at the next general election. The British people have had enough. We're sick and tired, as Robert was just saying, of paying huge bills, huge levies, huge policy costs for this catastrophic misjudgment of policy. It has impoverished everybody across the United Kingdom. And we at Reform will end it. We will stop it we will scrap net stupid zero, we will increase our energy production using our energy treasure so that we can increase the supply. It's basic economics. If you strip away the levies and the policy costs, and if you increase the supply of something, guess what happens to the price? It goes down. And that's where people want our bills. They want our bills down, they want our cost of living down, and the sooner, the better. This is a huge, huge shift in the debate. And I'm now going to ask the leader of Reform UK, Nigel Farage, to come and talk about gas and more things around this vital topic to bring down all of your bills. Nigel Farage.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Robert. The events in the Gulf serve to refocus us on some very, very important issues. To begin with, it's now 17 days since British sovereign territory in Cyprus was attacked by Iranian missiles. 17 days. And yet, I think that our naval vessel has made it, Dragon, has made it as far as Gibraltar. So by the time we send one vessel to defend British sovereign territory, it will have been 3 weeks. And when it comes to aiding the Americans in freeing the Straits of Hormuz, well, I think in many ways we ought to. I think it is in our national interest to keep the oil flowing. But we can't. We haven't got the assets. So I think the first very big lesson that comes out of all of this is that we have denuded the Royal Navy and our forces to such an extent that, frankly, we've been humiliated on the world stage. Our defence spending for next year is due to be just a fraction over 2%. And we're going to have to find ways to significantly and rapidly up that budget. To be fair, this is not all the fault of this Labour government. 14 years of Conservative government have run down our armed forces to a state, frankly, as I say, of total global embarrassment. But I think also what this crisis makes us think about is security of supply. Reports in the Times newspaper today that perhaps before too long we could see rationing, energy rationing, oil rationing, gas rationing. And this is frankly ludicrous. As Richard has said, the Norwegians are on a North Sea expansion where they plan to drill 250 new sites over the course of the next decade. I think 50 launched in the space of the last year alone. But North Sea oil and gas exploration ended as soon as the Conservative government put the tax up to 75% on profit. So you invest, you go and try and find oil and gas. If you lose money, you lose 100%. And if you succeed, you only make 25%. Even the Financial Times estimate that up to $50 billion worth of North Sea investment has been halted since that budget of Jeremy Hunt's. And of course, all Rachel Reeves has done is to make that worse, and the licensing conditions have been challenging, to say the least. We should not even be considering shortages of oil or gas, given the amount of reserves that we've got. The other argument that you'll hear from those that promote net zero, which is pretty much, and has been for 25 years, the entirety of the Westminster establishment. They gave up God, but they took up climate change. They will tell you it makes no difference because there are global prices. Well, that may be true for oil, but it is not true for gas. I recently had a meeting with the Deputy Secretary of Energy in America, who explained to me that whilst it's true that energy prices in America are a quarter of what they are here, even within America itself, there are huge geographical, regional differences in gas prices. And frankly, if you were setting up a manufacturing company, you'd probably go to Texas, where you'd find your bill would be an eighth of what it is to get energy and manufacture and produce here. And you know, the more we rely on wind and solar, the more we need gas. Because gas is the backup. As soon as we have either an anticyclone that sits for day after day over the North Sea, or the sun simply doesn't shine. Gas is absolutely vital. It is a strategic asset. And for Ed Miliband to have filled up the wells in the northwest of England with concrete is an act of vandalism, an act of the most incredible economic stupidity. I'm pleased today that Robert has announced a Brexit bonus. Listen in, Rachel Reeves. A Brexit bonus. We can only cut the 5% VAT on domestic heating bills because we are not members of the European Union. And yes, I'm hoping that NigelCutMyBills.com becomes an enormously popular website with many people signing up to it, although I didn't quite like the way that Robert suggested that I would personally be paying for the energy bills for an entire street for a year, but there you are. There you are. So it all depends what the gold price does, I suppose. But look, I think it's a great initiative, and let's be clear, we in Reform want to cut excessive government waste and spending, and that spending, of course, on net zero has been exorbitant. But the real truth is that for 2 decades now, we've hidden the true cost on people's bills of supporting renewables, of supporting the net zero project, and every single household in the land has had to pay that price, let alone our businesses and our manufacturers. So I think at last we can have a proper debate about these things. We are taking the cost of living very seriously as a party. I would also say that as I've broadened out the party this year, by putting together the beginnings of our shadow cabinet, by putting in place leaders of the party in Wales and in Scotland, we're not yet the completed item, but we're very much on our way there. Thank you very much indeed, everybody. Now, I've got questions from the press. I will endeavour to answer them myself, but if necessary, Robert and Richard will come back up to the stage. We begin with Catherine Forster from GB News.
Thank you. Catherine Forster, GB News. You've said that we ought to help in the Strait of Hormuz, but we can't because our armed forces are so denuded. You've talked about the need to increase defence spending. How would a reform government pay for that? It's going to need huge amounts of money. And also, Deputy Leader Richard Tice, perfectly legally, we know, saved £600,000 in tax through complicated offshoring arrangements. But in 2021, he tweeted about offshore private equity groups continue to rip off British taxpayers. And in your 2024 contract, your manifesto effectively, you promised to, quote, stop the offshore taxpayer rip-off. So I'd like to know what your policy is on that, given you want to form the next government. Thank you.
Well, you can't ban people from being involved in international business. You can't ban people from having bank accounts or companies listed and registered all over the world.
Quote, end the offshore taxpayer rip-off.
And the opposite thing, well, I think this is particularly around the care home sector. All right? This is especially around the care home sector, where it may well be that large amounts of tax that could be paid in this country are not being paid. And yes, we will look at that. I want to be clear about this on tax. Richard Tice has obeyed the law. He's filed his accounts on time. He's obeyed the law in every way. And no one pays more tax than they have to. You don't, I don't, no one does. And so I think, some of the questions around this show perhaps a lack of understanding around REITs, as they're known, and how they operate. And the idea that, he shouldn't have saved for a private pension. I just don't buy any of that at all. And by the way, it works the other way around too. I would like to see many, many more foreign companies registering in this country, paying corporation tax in this country. But the problem is, in the last couple of years, we've put up corporation tax, from 19 to 25%. That's a 30% increase. And so is it any wonder that many of the giant globals actually are registered in Dublin for tax and not in this country? So tax competition must be an important part of our international trade policy. It really must. As for defence, look, the brutal truth is that if you strip out the things that are not directly involved with defence or with providing equipment, the budget for next year, our defence spending is going to be about 2.2% of our overall budget. That is historically incredibly low. And I really think the fact that the French Navy, the Greek Navy, and even the Spaniards have sent naval vessels to defend British sovereign territory in Cyprus, and that it's going to take us 3 weeks to get a single vessel there, if that's not a wake-up call for a changing and a reshifting of our priorities, I don't know what is. Where are we going to save the money? Well, net zero, you've heard already, could save the government as much as 25 to 30 billion pounds a year. But look, the brutal truth is that we just can't go on with a benefits bill over 300 billion pounds. And that is going to involve some very, very tough choices. And there will be people that don't like what needs to be done. But I'm afraid it has to be done, and we will have the courage to face up to that, however loud some of the screams may be. Thank you. Katie Austin from the BBC.
Thank you. Good morning. Your party's approach to the US-Israel war with Iran has been inconsistent. What do you think we should, if we could, be doing to help the American request to protect shipping in the Strait of Hormuz? And you have made a lot of your close personal relationship with Donald Trump. Is what he's doing with Iran right or wrong?
Okay. Two big questions there. My approach to this has not been inconsistent at all. I said from the start we should have let the Americans use the bases, in particular Diego Garcia. That permission was initially refused. There was a U-turn on that. I suppose one side benefit of it is that there's absolutely no chance now of the Americans agreeing to the Chagos handover, given that Mauritius have made it absolutely clear that they would not have allowed the Americans to use the base and are now calling for a ceasefire. So I've been perfectly clear. We should have aided and assisted the Americans from day one. I never said we should join the attacks. How could we? I mean, you've got Israel and America, both with a couple of hundred, battle-ready aircraft. And what could we have provided? A dozen? 10, 8? I don't know. But I mean, that's the quantum that you're talking about. So even if I thought joining offensive operations was the right thing to do, which I don't, then I have to say we couldn't have done a blooming thing. In terms of the overall, I will say this. I was publicly very opposed to Iraq. I was vehemently opposed to Libya. And I do not like the thought of getting into commitments that can last far longer than anybody at first envisaged. My own view is that the West has had Iran wrong particularly since 2015 with the JCPOA deal, something which Liberal Democrats and others in this country still seem to think was a good idea. All that did was to free up tens of billions of dollars for Iran. They completely broke the clause about nuclear enrichment, and they used that free money to fund Hamas, the Houthis, Hezbollah. They are the source. They are the primary source of global terrorism. Into the bargain, they are a particularly appalling, brutal regime with public executions and so much else. If the result of the American-Israeli action is to stop these fanatics from getting a nuclear weapon, then that of itself will have been enough. Personally, I would love to see regime change. I have always thought the Persians to be a remarkable group of people who, if freed from such barbarism, would become the most incredibly successful country. And actually the whole dynamics, I think, of the Middle East would be different. I mean, we saw the beginnings of that, I think, with the Abraham Accords, for which Jared Kushner deserves, I think, great praise. And we were beginning to see some very powerful alliances build. If the regime falls, if we get something approaching, be it a constitutional monarchy or some form of self-government with direct engagement from the people, then the whole of the Middle East and the world will be a better place. Whether they can get to that, I don't know. But I repeat the point, that the main reason for the operation, and Trump, Trump does not want to get America involved in foreign wars. I mean, he's felt strongly about this for years. But clearly, the security threat that Iran were nearing the completion of a nuclear bomb is the reason that he did it. And I think we should bear that in mind all the way through. Thank you. Faye Brown from Sky News.
Hi. You've obviously got a good relationship with Donald Trump, and you've spoken about using that influence. So given that the war is driving up energy prices and polling suggests the vast majority of the British public don't support it, would you consider using your influence with Trump to implore him to end the war? And if I may, just on energy bills, it is one thing to run a competition, but quite another to run a country and make the sums add up. So if this is a serious offer to the public on cutting energy bills, why are you bothering with the prize draw stunt, and are you taking a leaf out of Ed Davies' book?
Well, energy bills would be lower if we were producing our own gas. If the North Sea was pumping out gas like the Norwegians are, if we were onshore developing gas as we ought to have been for over a decade, we would not, and by the way, it's gas prices that have risen far more than oil prices, we would not be subject to those same rises. It is also astonishing that, again under the Conservatives, our strategic gas storage is 2 days' worth. They closed down all those facilities at Bacton. So that's the first thing I would say to you. Second thing I would say to you is, I have said to this government ever since day one, and in fact you can see it in the Mandelson papers, I've said from day one that if there were areas of genuine national interest where this government wanted help, either with Trump or the rest of the cabinet, and I pretty much know all of them, that yes, I would help. And I would help the government achieve its goals if that was in the national interest, because above all, you know, I put the country and my belief as a patriot way above any party politics. And I've offered that to the Prime Minister to his face. I told Mandelson after he was appointed, you know, if you want me, I'm here. And so I would always do that. I would always do that. Unfortunately, the relationship has now broken down between the two leaders in the most extraordinary way. And I do think telling the Americans they could not use Fairford and they could not use Diego Garcia was an error. You know, sometimes in life you have to pick sides. Sometimes in life you have to make a decision. And this Prime Minister has desperately tried to sit on the fence all the way through this conflict. And I can't help thinking that the drag in British politics, particularly after the recent by-election in Greater Manchester, is that even our foreign policy is now being governed by domestic concerns about a growing number of people with radical Islamic views who've actually been out bemoaning the death of the Ayatollah. And I think this is shaping British foreign policy, and I think we should have picked a side. Which doesn't mean, going back to the BBC, it doesn't mean we had to join the offensive operations, but we should have shown support. And I genuinely think it was a big strategic mistake that the Prime Minister made. Thank you. Romney Weeks, ITV.
Thank you. You talk about strategic mistakes that the Prime Minister made. Do you think the President, the American President, made a strategic mistake in not predicting that Iran's retaliation would involve attacking global oil supplies? And with the assets that the UK does still have, how would you be ensuring that the Strait of Hormuz reopens?
Well, look, I mean, I don't think we can. If we can't send a single destroyer to defend British sovereign territory that is under attack and where British servicemen and women are under threat of being killed, it takes us 3 weeks to get a destroyer there. There isn't much we can offer. I do understand, as I'm sure you do, that we maybe have some quite good drone kit, we have some quite good anti-mine ability, and we should certainly lend that. That we need to get oil flowing through the Straits of Hormuz. If we do that, the spot price of oil will come down quite considerably, particularly after Venezuela. And Venezuela is the biggest producer of crude oil in the world, and now the Americans have done what they've done there. The flow of oil out of Venezuela is good. It is just down to these straits, and if they're cleared and if they're freed, oil will be back at a very sensible price, and very, very quickly indeed. No one says it's easy, but with what little assets we've got, I think we should assist. I don't know what intelligence the Americans had on this. Whether they expected Iran to start firing off missiles at all the surrounding states, I just don't know. I also know that when he says things, you should never ever take them too literally. When he says that the progress of the war, what they might do next. I mean, the last thing he's going to do is give the Iranians a clue as to what his thinking is. I don't know what the motivations were, but I genuinely think, as I said earlier, that if he really believed that the Iranians were on the verge of a nuclear bomb, that is what would have motivated him to do it. And it's tough for us to assess just how well or badly it is going at this stage. Clearly, a huge amount of Iran's capability has been knocked out, but the regime is still in place, and the IRGC are still brutalizing, or potentially brutalizing, the streets of Tehran and elsewhere, and in charge of missile strikes against our friends and allies right across the region. And yet, this Prime Minister refuses to prescribe either the IRGC or the Muslim Brotherhood, and I call on him again today to do so. Thank you. Sophie Church, Daily Mail.
Do you agree with the Chancellor, who is saying that the only way to achieve growth is by closer alignment with the EU? Thank you.
Sorry, I nearly coughed on my chips. This government, both this Prime Minister and this Chancellor, are hopelessly out of date. They're following a narrative and a view that was in vogue over a decade ago. The world has changed. Quite how you help the British economy by aligning more closely with a group of other economies, some of whom are doing even worse than we are, I just don't know. And the thought that aligning on rules and regulations, harmonising on these things, is good for the productive economy shows the total ignorance that this Labour government has. None of them have ever worked in business. If they had, they'd know, actually, it's competition. It's different products. It's different prices. That's what makes an economy. That's what gives consumers better prices. That's what brings more businesses and competition into a market. And they don't understand it. Sadly, it's very easy for them to align because the Conservative government did not, despite saying get Brexit done, actually get on and do any of those things. And I would just say this very quickly. If you want to think about economies and what model works, when the global financial crisis of 2008 happened, the American economy, the GDP of America, was exactly equal to the GDP of the Eurozone. Exactly the same size. And here we are, 17 and a half years on, and America's GDP is double that of the Eurozone. That statistic alone is absolutely mind-blowing. So ask yourself a question. Is the answer competitive taxes, supply-side reform, help for small entrepreneurs to get their little businesses up and running and going, or is it the Brussels machinery making rules designed, frankly, for half a dozen global multinationals and with a total lack of understanding of what free markets really are? I think I know the answer. Thank you. You'd have thought with all her expertise at the Bank of England she would too, but never mind. Katie Harris from The Express.
Thank you. The tax-free, the state pension is due to exceed the tax-free personal allowance in April next year. Can you guarantee that under a reform government, state pensioners whose only income is the state pension would not pay income tax?
Well, Robert is going to lay out many things for pensioners, including our position on the triple lock and much else, and that will all come within the next few weeks, and I will not attempt to speak on his behalf, other than to say that the freezing of tax thresholds isn't just dragging pensioners into tax, but it's extraordinary that, from the moment the 40p tax ban came in the mid-late 1980s, right through to the end of Gordon Brown's premiership in 2010, the number of people in Britain who paid top-rate tax was 1.5 million. 1.5 million people paid top-rate tax. By the end of next year, it will be 8 million that pay 40p or more. Just gives you an idea of how increasingly taxed we are and how there is, I get a growing sense of resentment out there from those that get up early, go to work, are paying more and more tax for what they do, and see their next door neighbours getting out of bed at midday, smoking dope for the afternoon, and frankly, being pretty much as well off as they are. And we have to increase productivity. We have to increase wealth creation. And government can do some of that, or government can create some of the conditions for that, but ultimately there is a massive cultural change needed in this country in terms of attitudes towards relevant qualifications, hard work, and rather than knocking success, perhaps as a country we should start applauding those that become successful. And if we don't get that cultural change, and if we're not prepared to accept that we can't go on being benefits Britain, then we are going to go bust. There is going to be a gigantic economic shock at some point in the next few years, which would be very painful for everybody. So big change is needed. Peter Schnepvangers from the Telegraph. Is over there.
Thank you. I'm conscious we actually haven't really spoken about the competition, so I want to take you back to September 2022, not far from here, the ITV studios. This morning did their own competition, very, very similar. Spin the wheel and we'll pay your energy bills for 4 months. It led to 200 Ofcom complaints, people saying it was tone deaf, and a lot of anger about it. Is there a fear that something similar could happen to this? I mean, how do you think it might land?
Well, we've done it now, so it's a bit late, really, isn't it? We're not going to U-turn immediately on this one, I can promise you. We'll leave that to the Prime Minister and others. Look, I think the point of this is we want, through the publicity that we think this site can generate, to get people to understand just how ripped off they've been for year after year after year on their energy bill, with up to 20% of their bills subsidising renewables, making Chinese manufacturers rich, foreign shareholders rich, with not much economic benefit for this country, and all of it done under a veil of silence. No one's ever been told. We're lobbing this on your bills for the last 2 decades. You know why? Because the whole of Westminster agreed. It was the Conservatives that signed up in law to net zero. Miliband now carrying it on with an extraordinary kind of zealotry. And if we can blow the lid on that, we'll have done a very, very good job. Thank you. Noah Hoffman from The Sun newspaper.
Thank you, Mr. Farage. So, local elections are coming up, and you're hoping to make a lot of gains in those. One local problem that is really noticeable at the moment is just the proliferation of litter and rubbish. There are so many streets around London that are just frankly disgusting now. It's feral, the amount of rubbish that is just piling up on the streets, including fly tipping. We haven't heard much about Reform's plans to make streets look beautiful. Can you give any idea to voters concerned about how disgusting some streets have become, what you would possibly do about that?
Well, I'd hope to save this, but I don't suppose I can now, can I? I had long chats over the weekend with the chairman and vice chairman of Reform. We've already had some branches that we've distributed tabards to, who've been out on litter pickups and street pickups. And my plan, I might as well just tell you now, my plan is to roll this out and to ask all 450 branches of Reform to pick a few days in April to go out as a team and clear up litter in their local areas. So, yeah, we're right behind the Keep Britain Tidy campaign. So we've done a couple of gentle, I can send you photographs of some of the rollouts we've done, but the plan is to do this literally across the whole country at some point during, hopefully when the weather's a little bit better, in the month of April. And, yeah, it needs to be done because it is, frankly, pretty shocking out there in places. Thank you. Helen Corbett from PA.
Thank you. Hi. Just to be clear, is your position that the UK should be sending ships to the Strait of Hormuz immediately? And Emily Thornberry said this morning that she thinks the King's visit to the US should be delayed in light of the tensions going on at the moment with Donald Trump. Do you agree with that?
We haven't got any ships or assets. We haven't got any ships to send to the Straits of Hormuz, but we do have some assets. And those assets are drones and anti-mine equipment. It's pretty modest, to say the very least. But yes, I think we should lend that kit. I think that would be a very, very good idea. I think oil flowing freely through the Straits of Hormuz will bring the global price of oil back to $75 to $80 a barrel. So yes. There are considerable tensions between the American president and the British Prime Minister. That is true, and they appear to be worsening, frankly, by the day. I would say that makes the King's visit even more imperative. Even more imperative. There is absolutely no question that Trump has a sort of awe-like respect. He did for the Queen, that's for certain, and he genuinely likes Charles. I know that. No, the King's visit becomes even more important. Because look, let's face up to something. You know, I said earlier, in life you have to pick a side sometimes. Without America, we are defenceless. Defenceless. So whatever short-term disagreements there may have been, we have to reach a working relationship whilst not necessarily always agreeing on everything. So the King's visit absolutely must go ahead. OK, what have we got next? James Heal, Spectator.
Good morning. Nigel, firstly, you mentioned about the importance reform is placing on cost of living. What other announcements or areas can we expect to be looking at in the future? And second, you mentioned Mandelson earlier. He once said that New Labour were intensely relaxed about people getting filthy rich as long as they paid their taxes. Could you give us Reform's guiding philosophy on this area?
Well, I'm not going to use the same phrase that Mandelson used, I can assure you. Do we want to encourage success? Yes. Is people making money? Good? Yes. But the biggest problem we've got now isn't just that the non-doms are leaving, isn't just that the super rich are leaving. The biggest problem we've got is there are huge numbers of 30-something ambitious people, entrepreneurs, people who want to take risk, financial risk with companies, with ideas, and they are leaving in droves. They are leaving this country in droves. And if we lose the risk-taking part of this of our nation, I'm afraid we're doomed. And the public sector, even Ofgem we were talking about earlier, the public sector gets bigger and bigger, and those prepared to go into the private sector and take risk, sadly, is becoming fewer. And that is my main concern. So, look, we need to change a culture. And it's almost as if we're living in a country where anyone that makes money or is successful is somehow a bad person. And that just needs to be reversed and changed as quickly as we possibly can. Fran Wang from Bloomberg.
Thank you. So apart from tapping UK's gas and oil resources, has the war in Iran made you have any rethinking of the significance of renewable energy as an alternative source of supply? And if foreign investors with leading renewable energy know-how, like those from China, were interested in investing in the sector in this country, would they have any opportunities under a reform government, or would you reject it? Thank you.
Well, I'd invest in renewable energies if the government was going to throw loads of subsidies at me. I mean, that's what it's all about. These renewables do not make money on their own. They only survive because of subsidy. In all sorts of, including, frankly, ludicrous strike prices that Miliband's agreed for the next 20 years. And we've made it clear we will break those contracts. We will break those contracts. And let's face up to it. Look, I mean, I don't object per se to renewable energy. I kind of get it. You know, if you put solar panels on a house, you can get, some of your own hot water. That's great. I rather wish they weren't all manufactured in China, but I get it. And there are local applications and uses for renewables. Ground source can be very, very good. But let's face it. If you want to turn your house into a net zero house, you can do it, but it'll cost you 50 grand. It is a very, very middle class luxury. So I would just say this. We've got on for 25 years with people saying don't worry about the subsidy. In the end it'll go, in the end it'll pay for itself, and it never ever has. And the more wind turbines we built, the higher our energy bills have become relative to every other single Western country in the world. So we just can't continue down this path. We are deindustrialising our nation, primarily because of expensive energy. And I'll say this, one last point on this if I can. The more reliance on wind you have, the more reliance on gas you have to have. Because if that anticyclone sits over the North Sea for a fortnight, and if suddenly wind production goes to between 2 and 5% of your overall input for a day, you have to turn the tap on and burn large amounts of gas and do it very, very quickly. And there is no alternative. And I'm very, very pro. I've always been very pro-nuclear, although the way we do it is ridiculous. It costs too much. The South Koreans do it for about a third of the price. There are other ways of doing these things. But you can't rely more on renewables without having your own home-produced gas and storage facilities. It is madness to think that you can, and it's a logic that just doesn't get through to either the last government or this. And I hope what you see is in Reform a party of people who've actually worked in business. I myself was a commodity trader. I have traded oil at times over the years, mostly metals, but I've traded oil too over the years. And what you see with us are people who've actually lived and worked in the real world. We've got some understanding of what actually makes the economy tick. Thank you very much indeed for your question. Camilla Tominey, Daily T.
Thank you, Mr Farage. On the Nigel Cut My Bills competition, what will you do if someone filthy rich wins? Somebody as wealthy as, say, Richard Tice. You don't want to end up paying all of the bills of the residents of Bishop's Avenue. And secondly, on polling, notwithstanding your row with YouGov, are you worried about reforms slightly going backwards in the polls and, as a consequence, the Greens seemingly soaring?
Look, I think it's fairly unlikely that anybody living in Bishop's Avenue is going to win Nigel Cut My Bills, and if the draw came out that way, I might have to redo it. What a terrible thing to say, I don't know. I shouldn't be as honest as this, I really shouldn't. Look, YouGov have been willfully manipulating these opinion polls, and I've been watching this for week after week. And in the end, I decided I'd had enough. It's not quite NatWest again, but I'm not very happy with them. It isn't just us, by the way, that they're getting wrong. What was the gold standard of the British polling industry has seen a 90% drop in its share price. All right? So that tells you quite a lot about the public's belief and confidence in their current methodologies, bearing in mind that politics is about 5% of what a polling company actually does. You'll notice in today's Times there is a slight readjustment from YouGov. We're up to, the Tories are down to. That's about halfway towards what we think is actually fair and reasonable. What I will say about the polls, over the last 2 weeks, if you look across the 6 or 7 British Polling Council regular companies, we are up over the course of the last 2 weeks. What is interesting is the lead. The lead over the Conservatives is 9.5% on average. The lead over Labour, slightly less, 8%. So what I'm pleased about is whilst we've stabilised after a big run-up, and we had a massive run-up after May the 1st last year. We won those county elections. It did lead to a bounce. We came back a bit. We're pretty much where we were 7 or 8 months ago. And I think what I'm seeing going around the country, I'm in Milton Keynes tonight, and I did 3 public events last week, and I'll be doing it all the way up until the 7th of May. What is really interesting, you look at the crowds that are coming, big crowds that are coming, and 80% of them are not members of Reform, have never been involved with Reform. They are curious, interested members of the public coming along to see us and listen to what we have to say. The one thing I will finish on with that is there's been a lot of talk in Westminster about the Chemie bounce. A lot of talk, I think sort of right across the newspapers, current affairs, magazines, a lot of talk about the Chemie bounce. And whilst it is true that our own performance in the House of Commons is it wasn't so good last week, but generally is more upbeat, more confident. She's been out doing more stuff than before. It is not cutting through in the country in any way at all. And I just don't think that conservative-minded, inclined voters are going to forgive the Boris wave. They're just not going to forgive it. You know, to be a Brexit government, you're there on the back of the fact that people want lower immigration, tighter borders, and to allow 3 million people in, of whom only 20% had work permits, to have fundamentally changed large areas of our city. And boy, we saw some of that in the recent by-election. I don't think the public are going to forgive them for it. I don't think it's Kemi's fault particularly, but that's just where we are. And I think these results, when we get these results on May the 8th, they could be, in historic terms, a very, very defining moment. Well, the Greens are going up and they're splitting the left. I mean, it is quite how, you know, the Metropolitan Liberals, with their dyed hair and very, very uber-liberal views, are, I was going to say getting into bed with them, I better not say that, are allying with hardline Islamists who think that women shouldn't learn English and should basically stay in the house 6 days a week. Quite how that alliance works, I simply don't know. But it, I think, is having a massive effect on politics. I talked earlier about the drag it was having on our foreign policy. And I think once Starmer goes, which is probably by the end of May, I would think, once Starmer goes, I've no doubt that the Labour Party will lurch even further in that direction, and we have the whole left of British politics fighting over a Pakistani, Kashmiri, Bangladeshi vote, which now is going to decide the outcome of at least 50 seats at the next general election. So I think I sense that the left of politics is going, by the next election, to be way to the left of Corbyn. And whilst it will have its own support base, I don't believe it's going to be big enough to have any ability to win the next general election. That's my thoughts. Thank you. Right, last question. Anna Gross, Financial Times.
I just wanted to get a bit of clarity on the announcement today. Are you going to pay for the renewables obligations levy out of centralised taxation or remove it entirely?
Gone.
It's gone entirely. And just
gone.
Yeah, if you're removing it entirely, won't this seriously harm investor confidence, given that they've built renewables projects, signed up to things off the back of it, and it currently accounts for 30% of UK electricity production?
You can't say that Richard Tice didn't warn them. He's warned them all the way through, particularly with the AR7 round, which is the biggest round of this that's ever been commissioned. And all the way through, Richard warned them, sat down with them, met the bosses of the 11 biggest companies that were potentially going to bid. And it was interesting, actually, that far fewer companies did bid in the end that many thought would. This has to end. This has to end. We want foreign investment. We want inward investment. We want our own investment. We want all these things. But it has to be on projects or sectors that can make money without making old ladies' energy bills more expensive than they should be and deindustrialising the base of our country. So, no, and yeah, look, you know, I get it. Some people will scream. Some people will shout. Some people will hate it. Some people have been living, you know, sucking on the teat of taxpayers' money for far too long. Well, you know what? It ends with us, as does this press conference. Thank you.
when you've got that sort of unity.
Yeah.
I don't think that could do the job. You do wonder whether even the consequences to it.
Because what is, I mean, it's nothing else he needs to win.
He's won leagues in 3 different countries. Got a couple of Champions League wins.
It's 4 hours in between our flights.